Breaking news this hour, President Vladimir Putin says he'll sign a motion to pardon jailed Russian tycoon Mikhail Khodorkovsky. The businessman, who spent more than 10 years behind bars for embezzlement, has reportedly already filed a petition to be pardoned. And joining me now live for more is our Igor Piskunov. Hi there, Igor. So why has Putin decided to pardon the businessman?
Well, the media conference lasted for over 4 hours, but the biggest news really happened after it came to an end. The president was surrounded by a group of journalists, and someone asked the question about Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and suddenly we found out from the president that the former tycoon had asked the head of state to be released from jail, and the president says that the man has already spent 10 years behind bars, and he is looking at signing that order.
Khodorkovsky recently wrote a petition asking me to pardon him. He spent more than 10 years in prison. This is a serious punishment. He cites humanitarian reasons, saying his mother is sick. I believe, taking due account of all the circumstances, it's possible to take a respective decision. And in the near future, I will sign a decree to pardon him.
Khodorkovsky used to be one of the wealthiest people in the world and one of the most influential in Russia. In 2003, he was arrested and then found guilty first of fraud and then in a separate case of money laundering and embezzlement. His sentence is supposed to end in 2017, and the news that came from the president was greeted with applause by human rights groups, and even reportedly took his lawyers by surprise.
Igor Piskunov live there. Igor, thank you very much indeed for that. And let's now get the view of political analyst Dmitry Babich on Putin's decision to pardon Khodorkovsky. And Dmitry, very nice to see you right now. So Putin says that Khodorkovsky could have filed a petition before, but he didn't. Why would have done it now?
Well, Mr. Khodorkovsky has just a few more months before he is supposed to be released from jail just because his term expires. There were several previous events when courts actually lowered or shortened the amount of time that he would have to spend in jail. So in this way, he just buys for himself 6 or 7 months of normal life. I guess that I don't know, it's very hard to say what the precise reason is, but maybe Khodorkovsky has been so stubborn before because he viewed Putin and his system as something totally alien to him, as some hostile force. Now probably he understands the system better, and he understands that this is not going to be a humiliation to ask for clemency from President Putin.
If he had filed such petition earlier, would Putin have supported that one? Is this a political calculation from Putin? What can you say?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised if Putin had done it before, because if you followed Khodorkovsky's trial, you could see a lot of very high-placed officials, Russian high-placed officials, who in fact gave testimony in support of Khodorkovsky. That was done by the former finance minister Kudrin. He was still the finance minister at the time. That was done by former economic development minister German Gref. So I don't see any reason why Putin should be afraid of doing that. I absolutely don't buy the Western theory that Putin is afraid of Khodorkovsky. I don't believe that Khodorkovsky could be a viable alternative for Putin at a presidential election. Russian people remember how fortunes were made in the 90s, and certainly the richest Russian man of the 90s would not inspire sympathy in too many Russians, just in a very limited circle of the richest Russians, maybe.
But Khodorkovsky's lawyer, as well as Khodorkovsky himself, say that they actually didn't ask for a pardon. What's going on there?
Well, we have here a very strange case of miscommunication. Either Mr. Khodorkovsky wrote this paper without his attorneys knowing about it. This is possible because he is known to take his own decisions, not necessarily taking advice. Or maybe Mr. Putin just decided that it's time to set Khodorkovsky free. In any case, I remember that there was a lot of people from the Russian liberal intelligentsia who actually asked Putin to pardon Khodorkovsky before his term expires. So Putin sort of responded to their letters, I would say.
The announcement comes amid a new case against Yukos, Khodorkovsky's former company, as we know. How will it affect the investigation? What do you think?
Yukos was a huge company. It had tens of billions of dollars. Certainly, a lot of this money was not quite clean because, Khodorkovsky himself acknowledged that they did the so-called tax optimization. A lot of this money is now abroad, so I'm not surprised that Yukos is being investigated. Setting Khodorkovsky free doesn't exclude the possibility that he may be questioned about this money. So I hope that truth will be found out and probably the Russian state will get its money back.
Dmitry Babich, political analyst, live from Moscow. Dmitry, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
And Afshin Ratanzi joins me now live from London for more analysis. Mr. Ratanzi, welcome to RT. So has this announcement come as a surprise to you?
Well, we knew that he was going to walk free theoretically in August of 2014. We've got to remember that he's been done for embezzlement, he's done for stealing oil. In a sense, that third Yukos trial, which President Putin was talking about at the Q&A in the past few hours, was the important one, because theoretically those charges, we don't know what the court authorities in Russia were going to pursue, but it was supposed to be a grand conspiracy. And we know that Khodorkovsky was in talks with Chevron and Exxon, close talks with State Department people in the Bush White House, and the Obama White House similarly were on his side. That's what most people consider to be the case, in which case it was this grander conspiracy, not the greatest theft in world history as it's been known from ex-Soviet assets, but how was he going to manipulate oil resources and energy resources in Russia with the United States? That was the big question. That was the third trial. And President Putin seems to be saying that he doesn't see it as feasible.
And why, from your point of view, President Putin would pardon someone who allegedly caused him so much trouble?
Well, we know he caused trouble because he embezzled so much money, as we were hearing, one of the richest men in Russia. As I say, the reasons for Putin's pardon, we probably won't know for quite a while. Famously, Khodorkovsky was an Amnesty International prisoner of conscience, Amnesty International US, very close to the US State Department. Presumably, the president believes that there is no further benefit for the Russian people. But of course, ultimately, it'll be up to the Russian authorities, besides the president, to decide on the future of Khodorkovsky. Because one thing is for certain, the Russian people will want to know, and the Russian people certainly applauded Putin when he talked against Khodorkovsky in the first two trials. They'll want to know, where is the money? Are they going to get the money back? And what is this oligarch been planning for Russian oil resources? And in terms of electoral politics, because we must remember Khodorkovsky favored a more neoliberal economic approach with alliances with the United States. We need to know all this information. If we're not going to get a third Yukos trial, we're going to have to find out otherwise. Maybe it'll be up to journalists and other people to find out if the Russian courts aren't going to.
Khodorkovsky only has half a year left of his jail term. Just how much of a relief is this?
Well, as I said, August he was supposed to walk free, but there was this third Yukos trial pending, which President Putin says isn't feasible. There will be voices in Russia who will be saying, no, there is a feasibility of a third trial because there's lots more proof that has come out. People will use everything from WikiLeaks cables to more other types of investigative research to show how the head of Yukos was involved with deals with American oil companies, other multinationals, and perhaps those very close to political power in Washington when it comes to energy reserves. So it's too early to tell whether this is just the end of it and that a pardon will succeed in quietening this story down. And certainly the Russian people will want to know what happened with all their money.
Sure, and Khodorkovsky has reportedly been targeted by a new investigation related to money laundering. Do you think his surprise pardon may be followed by another sentence?
I think it could well be the case. That'll again be up to the Russian authorities. There are so many different elements of the first embezzlement charges, let alone the stealing of oil conviction of the second Yukos trial to consider. So in a sense, he might be being tried twice over if it relates to embezzlement charges that relate to the prior two convictions. But as I say, the key trial that people were looking forward to, and I presume many Russians will have been looking forward to, is that third trial. How far did he want to exert political power over Russia and act as a proxy between Washington and all that money?
RT contributor Anshin Ratanzi. Mr. Ratanzi, thank you very much indeed for that. We appreciate it. And more perspective now on this unexpected pardon for Mikhail Khodorkovsky with Neil Clark, journalist and broadcaster. Mr. Clark, welcome. And according to the Russian president, it took Khodorkovsky 10 years to ask for a pardon. Why so long?
Well, I think Khodorkovsky sort of relished this sort of role as a prisoner of conscience in inverted commas, because of course he isn't a prisoner of conscience at all. He's a fraudster, he's an embezzler. But I think he's sort of relished this, and he's become a sort of pin-up boy, if you like, for the Western neocons and the Russophobes. And so I think that if he had applied for a pardon earlier, it wouldn't sort of gone along with the script that he was this wonderfully principled man who was in prison because of his political views, imprisoned by this evil President Putin, who was this evil Stalinist dictator. And so I think if he had applied for a pardon, it wouldn't have gone along with that script, would it? I think that's the reason why, to be honest.
And Khodorkovsky doesn't fall under a newly introduced amnesty. Why might he have taken this decision?
Well, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because only yesterday we heard the welcome news, I think, of the amnesty for the Pussy Riot punk band and of the Arctic 30. And these people were protesters. They were principal protesters. Whether you agree with them or not, they were actually protesting. And I think Khodorkovsky is a very different kettle of fish altogether. This man was part of a group of oligarchs who effectively stole billions of pounds from the Russian Commonwealth in the 1990s, stole from the Russian people. This was probably one of the greatest financial crimes of the century. So I think that we can't see this as part of a trend, but I think there was widespread sort of international concern about the Arctic 30. There isn't about Khodorkovsky. He's a fraudster. And I think that a lot of people will be concerned that he may be pardoned early and that he's not going to see his full sentence out, even though we're only talking about a matter of months here, really.
Who do you think this pardon for Khodorkovsky is aimed at? The international community or the domestic audiences? Well,
there's some people saying this is all about Sochi, about the Olympics, about President Putin trying to improve the image of Russia abroad. But I'm not sure if right-minded people will think that pardoning early a fraudster, an embezzler on a massive scale, is actually going to be see Russia in a better light, because most ordinary people around the world, and Russians too, of course, particularly, feel that Khodorkovsky got what he deserved. He's been in prison for 10 years, but his crimes were quite enormous. And so I think anybody who will be sort of cheering this on, very strange people who would want a fraudster and embezzler to be released. What kind of people are they? I can understand people, and I myself are pleased that the Arctic 30 have been pardoned, because their cause, I think, was a good cause, trying to save the planet. We can argue whether they did the right tactics, whether they did the right methods, but their cause is a good one, a noble cause. Khodorkovsky was a fraudster, an embezzler, and I think that Russian people particularly, and fair-minded people around the world, will look at these oligarchs like Khodorkovsky and think the best place for them is jail.
Neil Clark, journalist and broadcaster. Mr. Clark, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julia.